Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very successful and multifaceted professional from the UK, Mr. Richard Charlton. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, pleased to be here.
Richard is a coach, conservationist, and a teacher. He's focused on leadership coaching and change management. He's currently working in the area of coaching and conservation, and he's previously worked in the nuclear industry, in the fire and rescue service, and the British Army. Richard, what an amazing journey you've had across diverse sectors. Tell me a little bit about this journey and what made you become a coach.
I think it happened by accident, really. It wasn't an aspiration of mine to become a coach. I joined the army at a really early age, and I very, very quickly realized that I did things a bit differently. I grew up in Africa. I grew up in Botswana.
Okay.
And I think the African culture rubbed off on me quite a lot, in the sense that it was very much about dialogue and very much about conversation and working together, in a collaborative way, really. And so I joined the British Army after being at boarding school in the UK for a little while, and I realised very quickly I was different. I did things differently.
Okay.
I couldn't really put my finger on it, and after a career in the military, I went into the fire and rescue service, and again realised I did things a little bit differently. I wasn't sure what it was that I was doing differently, and it was only by chance that I ended up on a half-day introduction to coaching course as part of the fire service's leadership development program, and it sort of light bulb came on. I realised it's because I ask questions, and I'm curious about what people are thinking and why they think it, and that sort of led me on to moving out of the fire service, moving into leadership roles in the nuclear industry, and then I qualified to a higher level as a coach, and I got involved closed the circle with Africa, and started to become more involved in conservation, training anti-poaching teams, coaching anti-poaching teams, to be better at what they did and fill the gaps, and it's really quite comforting to know that actually there was nothing wrong with me. I just was different. So
yes, you decided to take a different path.
Yeah.
So Richard, we'll talk about coaching in a few minutes. You say that you're a conservationist. Help me understand this aspect of the work that you do.
So it's I see being a conservationist as a way of being rather than as work. So I spend a lot of time outdoors anyway. I live in the Lake District in Cumbria, and I've recently just been volunteer planting trees, simply planting trees. We planted over 1,500 trees just locally. We've helped some schools plant trees, working with the UK's Woodland Trust, and it made me. It's just part of that. Again, back to some of the African proverbs. The communities will flourish when old men plant trees that they'll never sit in the shade of. And that sort of really resonated with me around this, and so we do the tree. We look after. We've got deer. We look after deer that are local to us in the woods. The various other wildlife there. However, my passion is Africa. My passion is working in the bush in Africa, and I've worked in Cameroon a couple of times, working on elements of conservation, particularly around the training of anti-poaching teams, and working with them in various different ways, and that's really around protecting forest elephants, rhino, and any of the other big five that are around at that time.
And do you give back a significant part of your time to conservation?
Yeah, I do it all voluntary.
Okay, and both in the UK as well as in Africa.
Yeah. So I do take a small salary from the charity Veterans for Wildlife as their head of operations. And they have enabled me to start to engage and collaborate with conservation organizations around the world, and where I take a coach-like approach. Really, I don't go telling them what they need. I go and ask them where the gaps are, and discuss with them and explore where we as a charity, because what we do as a charity is we repurpose veterans' skills from the armed forces and also from the emergency services, so police, fire, ambulance. And we repurpose their skills in conservation. So whether it be community engagement, whether it be dealing with the wildlife human interface around on the edges of the parks, and even straightforward patrolling correctly, making sure that they stay safe out in the bush. And that's pretty much the crux of what we're doing. That's what I do. So
that's an amazing thing that you're giving back in. So let's now move, Rick, to your avatar as a coach. You said that you specialize in leadership, coaching, and change management.
Yeah.
Help me understand what you do and give me some examples.
So I'll give you some examples. So the leadership outside of it, we look at helping leaders be more present. We work, I particularly like to focus on having those really deep conversations with leaders to help them become more connected with the way that they are. Sometimes they don't realize how other people experience themselves in their presence. And I think that's really quite important, because unless you're present with people while you're leading them, and then people, what the old adage, people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. And I think that's really important. And also to help what we tend to call managers understand that there's a difference between leadership and management. And rather than me just tell them it, I ask them, so what's the difference between a leader and a manager? And very, very rare, very, very, very rarely do we not come to the conclusion that you manage kit, processes, systems, and buildings or equipment, and you lead people, because you can't just press a button and have people do what a piece of equipment, a system, or a bit of kit will do. So we work through those sorts of situations, and also we help them with their vision setting and goal setting, and that leads me into the change management arena, where organizations tend to apply what we call the hard skills, which is the program management, project management type methodologies, which are very much sort of gated and very structured and very process driven. And again, you manage a process, you don't lead people, you lead people. And what my role is helping people and organizations through change is to ensure that they have that engagement really early on with people, to take them on the journey through the change, because it's anybody working in change management will resonate with them, to understand that any barrier to change is predominantly based on a perception of the driver, not the actual driver itself. So for example, the driver for an organization to be more efficient, what the people on the shop floor or the employees are hearing is, you're going to take me off shifts, you're going to reduce my pay, you're going to make redundancies. So unless they understand what the driver for efficiency is, then they're going to come up with a barrier. And to understand that, you've got to do a cultural assessment of the organization. You've got to apply, I apply Gareth Morgan's metaphors to try and get a metaphorical understanding of what the organization might be, whether it be a flux and transformation organization, whether it be a political prison, or whatever it might be, and then understand what the leadership and the change management characteristics are around that metaphor, if you like, and then use those characteristics as levers to remove the barriers by dealing with the perception of the driver. And once you've got that, you can segment your workforce, you can start looking at all of your engagement strategies, and people feel part of what's being done, rather than, so it's done with rather than done to.
Very interesting. And did your previous experience, in the British Army or in the fire and rescue service, did that give you any specific learnings to become a better coach?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I was very much like I say, I grew up in Africa, so I grew up in a dialogic sort of way of being,
Mm-hmm.
and then I went in the military, which is very directive, and you just do as you're told, basically, and and then when I moved into the fire service, it was do as you're told, very disciplined, and then we started to move away from that as a service. They wanted to demilitarize it and to try and make it less direct, make it more inclusive, and there was various different changes that were implemented throughout the fire service, which were in effect whole scale cultural change. And the way that I experienced it wasn't great. So it was a case of how can I ensure that any other organization that is going to experience whole scale cultural change in that sense, how can they do it? So it made me start to explore and start to look at change management as a discipline. And what came what came out of that really clearly for me is that to be a good change manager, you've got to be a coach, because you have to help people. You have to create the environment for people to actually understand what it is that they're trying to achieve, help them understand what their vision is. And you can't tell them that. So if you're telling somebody something, straight away, you're on the back foot from a change and as a coach perspective.
Interesting. So, when I was reading about you, I read about your VUCA methodology, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. Talk to me about each of these and help me understand with maybe some examples.
So really, I think we can use COVID as a really good example of VUCA. We're volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Volatile in the sense that you don't really know what's happening. You're not sure. It's changing all the time. It's uncertain because of the fact that we didn't know what we didn't know, did we, when COVID started to take over the world? And it was highly complex because we didn't understand how it was going to be transmitted, how to protect against it, etc. And then ultimately the ambiguity around that was massive. So some countries were doing one thing, some countries were doing another. Some parts of certain countries were doing things different to the other parts of the countries. So that ambiguity, so everybody started to get into really difficult situations around understanding how to deal with that kind of situation and that kind of way of being, if you like. And what we work on and what I focus on is because VUCA originated in the military. It was a term that originated in the US military and it was penned to deal with the end of the Cold War and moving into the less prescriptive way of being as a military. And then we went into more sort of more conflicts where you had guerrilla warfare, terrorists, people dressed up as civilians being the enemy, didn't know what was going on. And one of the things that we try to focus on is how to defeat VUCA. And one of the key things for me on that is for volatility, you need to have clear vision. And for that uncertainty, you've got to create understanding. For the complexity, you've got to create clarity.
Right.
And for ambiguity, you need to be agile. You've got to be, we used to call it switching fire in the military. So you move from one target to another very quickly, understanding that you've got to be able to switch fire. You've got to have that agility. And once people start to get their head around and understand that, because if you're in a corporate world where everything's process driven and policies are very heavy and you're process driven, as soon as you get into crisis, or as soon as you get into VUCA, then all of them things don't work for you anymore. So you've got to switch your mindset. You've got to stop being a manager and start being a leader. And you've got to lead people through that volatility by providing the vision, the uncertainty by providing the understanding, the complexity by providing the clarity. And ultimately, you've got to be agile. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to deal with the ambiguity. So, and through coaching, and you can take each of those stages as a coach and work through each one of those as a key goal, and also understand where people have more development needs, if you like, and we work on whichever one's specific to the individuals, and then you end up with a more resilient person at the end of it.
Very interesting. My next question to you, Richard, is you worked across multiple cultures. Africa is culturally very different from the UK, and I'm not referring to Cape Town, South Africa, which may be culturally similar to the UK. my question to you is that how does culture impact coaching?
I think culture and coaching go they go hand in hand. And I think that there is a greater willingness and openness to be coached in certain cultures than there are in other cultures. There is an almost a level of because, so for example, I take the UK. In the UK, there is the culture in the UK is that, we're the best. We're pretty much the best. The Americans think they're the best, but we're actually the best. That's the sort of culture that is there. And there's very, very little sort of attention paid on trying to learn from elsewhere. So I like to look elsewhere, because actually the culture in the UK is in the lifespan of humanity on Earth. Western culture is one of the newest cultures, and we've actually forgotten and lost some of the indigenous cultural elements of what we do, and a lot of that is dialogic. It's that connection with nature. It's using what you need, not taking it. Take understanding that you belong to nature. You're part of nature. Nature doesn't belong to you. And one of the things that I like to do as a coach, I like to coach outdoors. I like to take people outside, take the shoes and socks off, and just get out on the ground, get your feet in the grass, get in the dirt, and just connect with the earth, and actually start to bring people closer to being part of the earth, and then to sort of move back from that and use the natural metaphors of nature to help people to understand that the world isn't developed and built and constructed in a corporate office or a corporate center. Nature happens around us. It's growth. It's growing around us all the time. It lives and it dies around us every single day. That circle of life, if you like, and all of that starts to put the focus back and brings the context to your own being and your own presence in the workplace, but also as a leader, and also as to help your well-being, and stress levels disappear, so you become more clearer. Your cup of emotion gets lower and lower and lower, so your emotional buy-in level at work becomes greater, so that you can take more on. And also it helps you to understand people better when you're leading them, and rather than just trying to be the solution guy all the time. Amazing. You become the person who asks the questions of that individual to create their own solutions. So you create thinking people, and naturally as a leader, what you want is an organization of thinking people. You don't want to be the only one with all the ideas, so the only thinking person.
Well said. So I have time for one more question, and this question is for the many viewers and listeners who will listen to our conversation, which is, given your amazing background and the amazing diversity that you've had, and now the fact that you are helping so many people as a coach, what would you say are 3 life lessons that you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
The past is history. The future is a mystery. The present is a gift.
Okay.
So grab hold of it. That's it.
Okay.
Live in the moment.
Okay. And would you like to just expand on each of these 3?
So what's happened. You can't change it. There's no point. Most people's anxiety, most people's hang-ups, most people's stress is based on something that's happened to them in the past, or hasn't happened to them yet, and might never happen to them. And by building this bundle of anxiety around things that have happened that you can't change because they've happened, situations or environments that have occurred that you're in and you can't change, so just get over it and just think about all you can do is work on yourself now and understand how you respond now. It's how you deal with that, what the emotion you're feeling because of what it is. It's becoming an observer of your emotions in the moment. And once you become an observer of your emotions in the moment, you actually become very, very clear on the fact that your ego is really causing you a lot of problems. And it's understanding that if you understand that you're not your ego is that part that needs to be pleased, or needs to be a victim, or needs to be in charge, or needs to be a driver, whatever, then you hit a period, this level of peacefulness that happens in your head. you become more grounded, and it's the same things that are going to happen in the future. If they most of the things that you worry about will never happen. So there's no point worrying about them. So be more grounded. And I think the key thing, and I've recently been on some development with a team in South Africa, and one of the sayings that came out of there was very, very strong for me. It was, we need to be a human being, not a human doing.
Wow. Richard, on that note, and I made a note of the quote that you gave me from an old African saying, which is, communities will flourish when old men plant trees they will never sit in the shade of. Thank you so much for talking to me.
No problem.
Thank you for talking to me about your journey, about your thoughts on coaching, on conservation, and for sharing such amazing life lessons with all of us. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.